Let me talk a minute about the film. I saw the film and I loved it, but I saw it once and I said, boy, I'm not going to see it again. It's a wrenching experience, and you don't seem like a really nice guy.
This interview took place February 8th, 1982. Jake LaMotta, now 62, appears on the David Letterman show to promote his product, LaMotta's tomato sauce. 2 years previous, Martin Scorsese had brought his book Raging Bull to the big screen. Robert De Niro, who played LaMotta, won his second Oscar for the role. In 1980, LaMotta had attended a screening for Raging Bull with his ex-wife Vicky. After the film finished, he turned to her and said, "Was I really that bad?" She replied, "No, you were worse." 38 years previous, the year is 1942, and Jake LaMotta, 20 years old, has not long turned professional fighter. He's had 20 fights by this point in just 1 year and suffered 3 losses. Jake was up to this point recently married, but the marriage ended after a drunken beating that almost resulted in manslaughter. Jake had thrown a party at his Bronx apartment, got blackout drunk, and during an argument with his wife, beat her unconscious. When Jake came to, he had no recollection of the events. He asked his brother Joey, who was in attendance that day, what had happened. Joey explained that Jake knocked his wife unconscious before stating, "If you want my opinion, she's dead. She ain't moving." Joey had attempted to revive her while Jake was himself unconscious by throwing water over her, but couldn't get her to open her eyes. A wave of panic hit Jake as he pictured the newspaper headlines reading, "LaMotta kills wife in drunken brawl." He then thought about the prison time that would follow, and with a terrible hangover setting in, Jake grabbed the nearest half-empty bottle of booze. After he took a swig, he grabbed the phone and began dialing. His brother Joey asked, "Who you calling?" To which Jake replied, "Pete. Maybe he'll have some ideas." Side note, at this point I should mention, so as not to confuse anyone watching this, Pete was LaMotta's best friend, and many of the events in the film Raging Bull that happened between Jake and his brother Joey actually happened between Jake and Pete. For some reason, Scorsese decided to intertwine Pete and Joey into one person when making Raging Bull. Basically, almost the entire relationship between Joey and Jake depicted in the film was actually between Jake and Pete. After Raging Bull was released, Jake's brother Joey threatened to sue for defamation of character. He never did. After Jake informed Pete of the situation, he hung up and decided the best course of action was to throw his wife's motionless body in the river. The two thought about how they could carry an unconscious woman through the streets of the Bronx without arousing suspicion when Joey came up with an idea. He stated, "We could roll her up in the rug, then if people saw us, they'd just think we're carrying a rug." But they agreed on the plan, but at that moment, Jake's friend Pete entered the apartment. He was informed of the plan of action and couldn't believe what the two LaMottas were saying. Pete stated, "Are you guys nuts? What are you going to do when people come looking for her? Throw them in the river too?" Jake snapped back, "So what we going to do? Call the cops and tell them I'm sorry I killed her?" Pete argued they should call a doctor, tell him she was drunk and fell down the stairs. They agreed on this, and luckily for Jake, she wasn't dead. Jake avoided any prison time, but in an unrelated case, Pete was sentenced to 15 years in prison for assault. By the end of 1942, Jake had fought Sugar Ray Robinson, his 32nd fight, and he'd lost on a points decision. His brother Joey was also a professional boxer, and at this time had won his last 18 fights by knockout. The years went by and Jake fought Sugar Ray 3 more times, losing twice and winning once. By 1946, he met his second wife Vicky. She had been dying to meet him, and Joey introduced Vicky to Jake. After just 3 months they were married. Jake at this point was 24 years old. At this time, Pete was released from Sing Sing after only serving 3 years of his sentence. He was sitting drinking in a club one night when he was approached by a local mobster known as Salvi. As they sat drinking, Salvi asked Pete to convince Jake to throw a fight in order to get a title shot. Pete refused to entertain the idea and the subject was dropped. As they continued talking, as a gesture of goodwill, Salvi invited Pete to join him on a double date. This immediately threw Pete. Salvi and him were never close friends, and he suspected he was being set up for something. He agreed anyway, and Pete spent the rest of the night trying to figure out what Salvi was up to. The next day they would meet as agreed on a street corner near Pete's house. Salvi had recently bought a new Cadillac convertible and he was eager to show it off, so he insisted he drive. Pete stood leaning against a lamppost reading the newspaper about one of Jake's fights coming up as the car pulled up. Salvi shouted, "Hop in," and Pete was about to open the door when he saw Vicky, Jake's wife, was sat in the back seat. Pete froze when he saw her and Vicky broke down in tears. She then yelled, "Oh Salvi, how could you do this to me? Oh my God, what if he ever tells Jake?" Salvi by this point was laughing hysterically. He then answered, "I just wanted to show this guy how stupid him and his pal can be." Before he could say any more, Pete pulled him out the car and beat him until he lay motionless on the pavement. He then grabbed Vicky and pulled her in a cab. As they were getting in, Salvi had rose to his feet and was swearing revenge. Pete half considered going back over to him, but instead he left in the cab. He ordered the cab driver to take them to Jake and Vicky's home, and she cried the entire journey. When they got to the house, Pete said nothing. Vicky then had a change of moods, stopped crying and said, "Go ahead, tell him. I wouldn't be surprised if he killed me, the temper he's got." After a good hour of silence, Pete finally responded, "No, Vicky, you tell him if you want to. What you want to do with yourself is your business. Nobody ever told me I should take over people's lives. I know the way Jake feels about you, and I'm not sure that if I told him, he wouldn't call me a goddamn liar and bust my head open." Vicky was shocked. She stopped crying, wiped her nose, and said, "Honest to God, you mean it? You're not going to tell him?" Pete confirmed he wouldn't say anything and left. Not long after, Salvi and a few others visited Jake's gym and tried to convince him to work with them. The payoff, of course, would be a title shot. Jake refused and told them to get out the gym, and as they were leaving, Salvi asked, "What is your friend Pete doing over at your house while you're away fighting?" Before Jake could say anything, Salvi ran out the doors. So unstable was Jake, this was all it took to put the entire belief Vicky and Pete were having an affair into his head. Enraged, he threw on his clothes and raced home. He burst into the house and into the kitchen where Vicky was stood. Vicky, seeing the disturbed look on his face, asked Jake, "What's wrong? What do you look like that for?" Jake then asked Vicky who she'd been seeing while he was away at the gym or out of town. Vicky replied, "I don't see anyone. What do you mean? What are you talking about?" Jake then began slapping her repeatedly. Vicky ran into the bathroom and locked the door. By the time Jake had kicked the door in, the room was empty, but the window was wide open. Vicky had slipped out and jumped into her car. Raging with anger, Jake ran out the front door and into his own car and gave chase. They sped through the Bronx at 80 miles an hour. It dawned on Jake as he was driving, Vicky was heading to Pete's shop. With Salvi's words still running through Jake's head, it now all made sense. Pete and his father owned a dressmaking shop, and it was there Jake saw Vicky's car parked outside. He burst through the doors and searched the shop floor. After he couldn't see either Vicky or Pete, he headed upstairs to the office. There he saw Vicky crying in Pete's arms. Jake bulldozed his way in the room, throwing punches as hard as he could. When Pete went down, Jake continued hitting him. Vicky began slapping and grabbing Jake, screaming, "You're killing him! You're killing him! All for nothing!" Jake then turned to her, hitting her with the back of his hand, and shouted, "What do you mean for nothing?" A shouting match then ensued in which Jake echoed Salvy's words and Vicky argued Pete was the only one of Jake's friends who didn't make a pass at her. All the anger and hate drained out of Jake as he stood there motionless. Vicky was still slapping, hitting and pushing him out the door at this point. Before Jake left, she screamed, "You're a sick maniac. You belong in an asylum." Jake went home and sat on his sofa in a zombie-like state. It was late at night before Vicky got home. She let herself in, came into the room Jake was sitting, and told him Pete wasn't dead and she was leaving him. By this point, she wasn't worried about Jake going into a rage and killing her. She stated, "There are worse things than being dead, and one of them is living with you." The scene was a living nightmare for Jake, and he broke down apologising and begging her not to leave. Eventually he convinced Vicky to stay. After this event, Jake was more determined to get the title than ever. In this mind, he believed it would cure all of his problems. The months went on with Pete and Jake not talking. They hadn't spoke a word or seen each other since the fight in Pete's shop. Vicky urged Jake to contact him, knowing how bad he felt. Jake asked Vicky, "But what do I say?" She replied, "I don't know." Not long after, Salvy turned up at Jake's gym with an offer. He would get a title shot and $100,000 if he threw a fight with his next opponent, Billy Fox. Jake thought about the idea for a while. He'd been battling the mob for 4 years and it had gotten him nowhere. He was getting older and he feared this would be his only chance at getting a title shot. He didn't let Salvy know this, of course. He just answered, "Out," and pointed at the door. After thinking it through, he later reluctantly agreed. Billy Fox had 2 big problems as a fighter. 1, he couldn't punch, and 2, he had a glass jaw. It didn't matter though. Fox was in the hands of the mob, so he only needed to look the part to the general public. The fight took place November 14th, 1947. A crowd gathered at Madison Square Garden, and Jake rushed out his corner to start the fight. He threw a few jabs, and Fox began to look dazed. Jake didn't realise Fox was this bad. At this point, he was worried Fox couldn't make it to the second round. By the third round, Jake was panicked. He was going as easy as he could, but Fox was no tough fighter. Jake later said, "Every time you hit him, something jarred." By the time they got to the 4th round, everyone in Madison Square Garden could see what was happening. Jake was not selling this convincingly. The crowd began booing and yelling. Jake decided at this point to just let Fox hit him. It was the only way, and he just wanted the fight to be over. After Fox hit Jake with 15 unanswered punches, the referee stopped the fight. Fox was announced the winner by technical knockout, and the crowd shouted, "Fake!" After the fight, there were hearings and investigations. Jake was fined $1,000 and suspended for 7 months. Those 7 months Jake sat at home, he later described as some of the worst of his life. Side note, Billy Fox by 1960 was committed to a mental institution and said to be seriously ill. He later died in 1986 at the age of 59. When Jake's ban was lifted, he continued to fight. No title shot was on the horizon, but he kept hope. One day while walking through the park, Jake's brother Joey approached him with news from the mob. He'll soon get his title shot, but it will cost him $20,000. Jake agreed. He would in fact only be paid $19,000 for the fight, so he'd be taking a $1,000 loss. In an effort to make some kind of money, Jake bet $10,000 on himself to win, and of course, he did win. The fight was held in Detroit, one of Jake's favourite places. He walked out to a noisy reception with half the audience booing him. The papers at the time said of Jake, he was probably the most detested man of his generation. In the first round, LaMotta walked Sedan down before pelting him with shots. Whether it was a slip, a push, or a shot landed is unclear, but Saddam went down. He fought back, throwing jabs in the second, and in the third and fourth the two began trading shot for shot. As the rounds went on, it became obvious Saddam was being outpunched. By the ninth, the referee stopped the fight. Jake's hand was raised and all hell broke loose. Joe Louis presented Jake with a gold and jewel-studded championship belt. Jake was so happy, he began crying right there in the ring. A rematch clause was in the contract, so LaMotta Sedan 2 was scheduled for December of 1949. It never took place. Sedan was killed in a plane crash in October. At this time, Jake was really having trouble keeping his weight down. He saw eating and drinking as a reward for his hard work in the ring. He was scheduled to fight Rocky Graziano, made famous by the film Somebody Up There Likes Me. It never happened. Graziano punched a tree, broke his hand, and the fight was cancelled. By 1951, Jake took on Sugar Ray Robinson for the sixth and final time. He had put on so much weight by this point, he could have fought heavyweight. He went on a strict diet to drop down. In the last 2 weeks of training, he barely ate anything. 5 days before the fight, he could barely walk and collapsed. He spent the next few days resting in bed. When reporters asked why Jake wasn't training, his team answered, "He's in such great shape, he doesn't need to train." The day before the fight, he was still 5 pounds over. His trainers took him to a steam room to sweat off the extra weight. Jake staggered out after 10 minutes, only for his team to push him back in. Another 10 minutes and he staggered out again but was pushed back in. This process went on for hours, but eventually he made weight. Although he was ready for the fight, Jake knew he was in no condition to battle Robinson and the loss was inevitable. The night before the fight, he bought a bottle of brandy. On February 14th, the fight, which was later known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, took place. In the early rounds, Jake boxed well, but gassed by the 10th. The fight was stopped in the 13th when LaMotta was unable to answer any punches through pure exhaustion. Jake later said, "I didn't know it then, but that was the end of my career." After the Robinson fight, Jake moved up to light heavyweight. He was now in his 30s. In December of 1952, he fought Danny Nardico. He suffered his first ever knockdown in that fight, and the fight was stopped in the 7th round. 3 fights later, he retired for good. For his retirement, he and Vicky moved to Miami Beach in Florida. They bought a house near the Lagos Golf Club, and Jake began drinking heavily. For however chaotic Jake's life was in the ring, outside the ring would prove even worse. He was about to lose everything.